Hello, AP Euro. It's Mr. Walker, and today I'm going to go over the Protestant Reformation, and I'm going to try to do it as succinctly as I can. The thing is, with this chapter, this is one of the more confusing chapters in all of the course, and so there's a lot of family drama, a lot of different names. There are even lots of different names for the same idea, depending on which part of Europe you're in. And so I'm going to try to make this succinct. I'll make some other videos that get into a little more detail that remind us of some of the sequences that we learned about this year in depth, including the start of the Protestant Reformation and also the 30 Years' War. But I'm going to try to do more of an overview today. And so I've got McKay open to chapter 13. And I've got my crash course book open to the Protestant Reformation. And I think one of the more important things is to get an idea of the big view on this. And so take a look at the different titles for the chapters that it covers. It's going to cover the early Reformation. It's going to cover the Reformation in Germany, and then the spread of the Reformation outside of Germany, and then the Catholic, the counterpunch, the counter-Reformation, and then the violence that occurs as a result of that. The way I would think of it is I'm just going to write Protestant Reformation up here, Protestant Reformation, and just within the name of these words, Protestant, think of what the word inside that, protest, right? And then reform, a protest movement asking for reform or for change. And so think of this as a revolution. It's a revolution against the church, but it also becomes a political revolution too. There are people protesting, wanting the Catholic Church to change. And the major date, the big turning point date, just like with global exploration, was 1492. Think of the upheavals that are going on during this time period. In 1492, you have the discovery of the New World. And then in 1517, you have the first real fissure or crack in the Catholic Church. And that, of course, with the 95 Theses and Martin Luther. And that takes place in the HRE, or the Holy Roman Empire, which is modern-day Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, that whole central part of Europe. And so that's in 1517. Of course, this isn't the first example of protest against the Catholic Church. It had been going on for a long time. And in the beginning of the year, we learned about people who were challenging corruption in the church, like Jan Hus or John Wycliffe. And in order to remember how is the church being challenged, think about what these people were challenging. So, for example, they wanted the Bible in the vernacular, in the language of the people. Vernacular. And they also wanted to say that the supreme spiritual authority was not the Pope, but the Bible. And because they believed this, they wanted people to know the Bible and to read it in their own language. And so these protests happened all the way back in the 1300s. And so these ideas have been going along for a while. And Martin Luther actually is the one who successfully breaks. Here, Jan Hus, if you remember, cooked goose Hus, he was tried and burned at the stake by the Catholic Church. But you have a greater wave of protest and calls for reform that have been present for a while. And if we remember from a couple days ago, we were looking at Christian humanists. So Christian humanism, this Renaissance idea of reading the Bible in Greek in the original version and then translating it to the vernacular, which was popular in Northern Europe, especially in England with Thomas More, who wrote Utopia, meaning no place in Greek, and that was in England. And then in the Netherlands, you've got Erasmus, Desiderius Erasmus, And then the quote that's often attributed to him, remember, he laid the egg that Luther hatched. Laid the egg that Luther hatched, which is a pretty sort of disgusting, silly idea. And of this guy laying an egg and then Luther sitting on it until it burst. But I would argue that Erasmus wasn't the one who laid that egg, that it happened a long time ago. And what are things that people have been criticizing also? They're criticizing the corruption, like simony, owning, where priests would collect and bishops would collect tithes and taxes from churches where they were not even present, and also corruption such as the loose morals, or priests who have children or have marriage. So let's say a lack of morals in priests, and so. All these ideas have been going, the criticism has been going, and then sort of what broke this, and if you'll remember back, you memorized a sequence of 10 different things that led to the 95 Theses, and then resulting eventually in 1555 at the Peace of Augsburg. And there was a sequence of events, Augsburg, that we went through. And so that was, the first was that again, during this time between 1400 and 1600, not only is there global exploration, not only is there this challenge against the church, there's also the Renaissance. And the Renaissance is going on in Rome as well and in northern Italy. And wealthy people, including wealthy merchants like the Medicis and bankers in Florence, and also popes are glorifying themselves with art. And so you have the Pope he's raising money to build St. Peter's Basilica, the huge church that's still there in Rome. Building St. Peter's, and how is he going to raise money for that? How is he going to be able to pay Michelangelo to paint the ceiling at the Sistine Chapel? They use indulgences, and I don't have time to get into all of the details, but you know that indulgences, it's basically a ticket to heaven for your relatives, a ticket out of purgatory. And so they start selling indulgences all over Catholic. See, that says indulgences down there. Pope building St. Peter's with indulgences. And then they send representatives of the Holy Roman Empire. And remember Tetzel, when a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs. That was part of the advertising that was going on to try to get people to pay to get their relatives out of purgatory and into heaven. And so as Tetzel is traveling around selling his indulgences, you have Tetzel selling in HRE. You've got Martin Luther, and he protests against this, and he nails his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral. And why does this make a difference? Well, this is during a time when you've got a new communication technology, and that is of the printing press. And because the printing press is around, it's able to disseminate or spread these ideas. Of course, Jan Hus and Wycliffe didn't have the printing press, but Luther does. And so these ideas spread throughout the Holy Roman Empire. And it gets back to Charles V, who is the Holy Roman Emperor. Remember, Charles V, he inherits Ferdinand and Isabella's claim to Spain and also the New World. He also has all of the Holy Roman Empire and also the Netherlands. He's one of the largest empires, this Habsburgs, and so they control the Holy Roman Empire, they control Spain, they control the New World, they control the Netherlands, and so he's having this revolt on his hands. And so Charles V as well as the Pope, calls Luther to the Council of Worms. Council of Worms. Charles V, who is the HRE, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Pope. And what does Luther do there? This is where he does his Queen Elsa and says, "Here I stand." He does not recant. He does not take back his criticism of the church. And he says, if you can show me in Scripture where it says that I'm wrong, then I'll accept. But unless you do, here I stand. I will do no other. And so Luther, it looks like, if it goes just like what happened to Jan Hus, that Luther's going to be killed. But they're nobles in the Holy Roman Empire, and he goes into hiding in the Wartburg Castle, and the nobles hide Luther. And so while Luther's in hiding, you'd think, why doesn't Charles V immediately arrest him and get him? Well, Charles V has a lot of other things going on. If you remember, he's fighting the French on his... So Charles V, he's fighting on his west side. He's fighting France. And on his east side, he's fighting the Ottomans. And the Ottomans, their empire is expanding. They get all the way to Vienna. And so Charles V is busy fighting. So busy fighting them. And so on either side. And so he doesn't have time to get Luther. And so meanwhile, Luther is doing a lot of work. He's printing the Bible in German, in the vernacular. And this is the first, think about German nationalism. We usually think about that in the 1800s with like the Brothers Grimm. But here in the mid 1500s, Luther, or the early 1500s, Luther is printing the Bible, a text that becomes a standard text in German. And not only is he spreading these ideas in writing, he's also making prints and cartoons or drawings or etchings, and also of songs. He wrote this song, "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," which people still sing in churches today. And so this is able to translate ideas to illiterate people too. And these become very popular and widely spread throughout the Holy Roman Empire. And so this is where we talk about, is Luther a nobleman or is he a noble's man? And Luther here, a bunch of peasants thinking that Luther is calling for this revolt or break from the Catholic Church. They think, you know what, we should break from our nobles. We're serfs, we're treated horribly. And so the peasants revolt. And what does Luther do? Does he support the peasants? No, he does not. He supports the nobles instead. He writes something against the murderous, thieving hordes of peasants. And 75,000 peasants are killed in this revolt against nobles. Luther supports nobles. He is a noble's man, not necessarily a nobleman. Luther supports nobles. And why does he do that? Well, he needs the noble support, because without the noble support, the Pope and Charles V are going to get him. And so he needs this noble support. And he's not as much of a revolutionary as you might think, because he doesn't help with the peasants. At this point, it's not just Lutheranism. So the people who follow Luther's idea are Lutherans or Protestants, protesters. And in this part, there's a split. There are different types of Protestants, including Anabaptists, including this other guy, Zwingli, including, you've got Luther. And so they meet together to try to decide, can we be unified? They're unable to agree on how they're going to be unified as Protestants. The one thing that they do agree on is that instead of 7 sacraments like the Catholics had, there's only going to be just a few sacraments, just baptism and communion. Communion are the only sacraments that are in the church, meaning things that a priest needs to be present at. in order. That's a holy ceremony. Those are sacraments. Okay. And, okay. So basically, when Luther dies in 1546, his ideas still live on. And the nobles, finally Charles V gets back to the Holy Roman Empire after fighting the Ottomans and fighting the French. And he has to fight against the nobles of the Holy Roman Empire. And so the nobles, they rise up in what's called the Schmalkaldic League. Schmalkaldic League. And they fight against Charles V. And they're able to finally defeat him and agree to a truce, and that's the Peace of Augsburg. And so here, he who controls the region controls the religion. The nobles get to choose. Nobles choose religion of their region. It's like cuius regio, ius religio. If you control the region, you control the religion. And there's only a choice between, you can either be Lutheran or you can be Catholic. Those are the only choices you get. And so at this point, I like to end the story not there at the Peace of Augsburg, but what happens to Charles V afterward. Charles V steps down from his throne. Charles V abdicates, and he splits his empire between his son, Philip II, who gets Spain and the New World, and then to his brother Ferdinand, who gets the Holy Roman Empire, and splits. And so now it's not just one Habsburg controlling all of Spain and the Holy Roman Empire and the Netherlands and the New World. You have two different Habsburgs, the Spanish Habsburgs, with Philip II. And you have the Austrian Habsburgs. His name is Ferdinand. And so there's this split. Okay. This part then is just the part of the Protestant Reformation that has to do with Luther and his protest. And then the result is the Peace of Augsburg and the split of the Habsburgs. Okay. I'm going to make another video for the next part. And the next video I'm going to do is going to be about different Protestant sects that come out of this, including in England with the English Reformation, and also in Switzerland with the Calvinists. All right. And then I'll add to this from that video.